Sirens, firefighters, chaos. The reason? My grill with ribs. Karen screamed, "He's destroying the environment!" demanding my arrest. The captain sighed. "Ma'am, it's just a barbecue." But what happened next turned everything upside down. Sunday barbecues in my backyard were sacred. The sizzling grill, the aroma of spices and juicy ribs crackling on the grates. This was the cozy atmosphere I had dreamed of when buying a home in this neighborhood. My spacious yard, neatly trimmed grass, comfy lounge area, and brand new grilling station were my little slice of paradise. Friends and family gathered here every weekend, laughter filled the air, steaks sizzled, and the smell of barbecue lingered in the breeze. But my peaceful oasis was always under threat. Because I had a neighbor named Karen. Karen was the type of woman who seemed born to make everyone's life miserable. Around 50, with short hair, squinting eyes, constantly searching for violations, and the expression of a prosecutor who just cracked a major corruption case. She was the president of the HOA, the local homeowners association, supposedly keeping order in the neighborhood, but in reality, it had become her personal tool for power. Oh, Karen always found a reason to come after me. She sent me violation notices because my mailbox color was not in line with community standards, complained that my grass was too green, yes, too green, and once even left a written warning threatening a fine because my trash bin was 15 centimeters past the HOA's approved placement zone. But today, she took things to a whole new level. I had just fired up my grill when I heard that all too familiar, high-pitched, whistle-like screech. "You're destroying the environment!" I slowly turned my head. Karen stood at my fence, her face bright red as if she had just discovered hazardous waste in her backyard. Her eyes darted between my grill and me, and her arms flailed wildly as if summoning the gods of clean air to intervene. "The smoke from your barbecue is polluting the air. This is an environmental catastrophe," she shrieked, shaking her phone as if already dialing a number. I sighed. "Karen, it's just a barbecue." But Karen wasn't the type to be calmed by logic. "I'm calling the fire department," she declared, pressing the call button with the authority of a general declaring war. I couldn't help but laugh. "Are you serious?" I smirked, flipping my ribs. "Karen, the fire department doesn't respond to dirty air complaints." "Oh, they absolutely do," she snapped, raising her finger like she had just exposed a grand conspiracy. I shook my head and continued grilling, assuming this was just another one of her HOA power trips. She'd huff and puff, scribble something in her little violation book, and storm off like usual. But 10 minutes later, I heard sirens. I looked up. A fire truck turned onto my street, red lights flashing, sirens blaring as firefighters in full gear jumped out, scanning the area for danger. I froze. She actually called them. At first, I couldn't even process how absurd the situation was. Here I was, grilling ribs, while trained emergency responders stood ready to battle a non-existent fire. I glanced at Karen. She was standing triumphantly next to the firefighters, waving her arms dramatically, inflating the situation like she had just uncovered an industrial pollution scandal. "There he is!" she bellowed, pointing at me. "He's burning trash in a residential area. He's poisoning the air. This is a threat to the entire neighborhood." I couldn't believe my eyes. The firefighters looked confused. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a thick mustache, glanced from Karen to me. We got a call about a fire?" he asked. I took a deep breath, trying not to laugh. "No fire, Captain. Just a barbecue." The firefighter looked at the smoking grill, then at me, then back at Karen, who was now puffing up like an overripe tomato. "This is an environmental hazard!" she shrieked. I closed my eyes and exhaled. This woman had just mobilized emergency services over my ribs. And suddenly I realized, this day was about to get very interesting. The firefighters jumped out of the truck with the speed and urgency of a team responding to a real emergency. They were focused, professional, ready to save lives, until their expressions shifted from determination to sheer annoyance when they saw the source of the fire. My grill. My perfectly normal, completely legal backyard barbecue grill. It stood there, peacefully smoking with the rich aroma of seasoned ribs, the kind of scent that would make any rational person ask for a plate rather than call 911. The fire captain, the mustached man who had clearly seen some things in his career, stepped forward. His eyes swept over my yard, the lawn chairs, my friends enjoying snacks, and finally, the fire. He sighed. "We were called for a fire?" Before I could respond, Karen pounced. "Yes!" she howled, bursting into the conversation like she was fresh off a protest rally. "He's burning trash in a residential area. This is a crime against the environment." She pointed at me with such intensity, you'd think I was single-handedly deforesting the Amazon. The captain raised an eyebrow, slowly turning his gaze from her to me, then back to the grill. He took a deep breath, visibly restraining himself. "Ma'am," he began, choosing his words carefully. "This is just a barbecue." But Karen wasn't finished. "That smoke is toxic," she screeched, "and it violates HOA regulations." She turned to the firefighters, fully expecting them to tackle me to the ground, handcuff me, and confiscate my grill as a weapon of environmental destruction. The firefighters just stared. One of them slowly removed his helmet, wiped his forehead, and gave the captain a look that clearly said, "Seriously? We got called for this?" I took a deep breath. Honestly, I was done with this circus. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and flipped it open. A badge gleamed under the sunlight. Federal Environmental Inspector. Silence. The captain blinked. Karen froze. Even the heat from the grill felt cold compared to the look on her face. "Excuse me, you're who?" the captain asked, needing confirmation. I smiled slightly. "Federal Environmental Inspector," I said, pausing just long enough to enjoy the moment. "And I can officially confirm that my grill poses no threat to the environment." I turned to Karen, whose face had drained of all color. "But false emergency calls? Now that's a whole different issue." Karen swallowed hard. At that moment, it finally hit her. She was screwed. The fire captain, who had remained stone-faced until now, straightened to his full height. His eyes held a mix of exhaustion and irritation. He glanced at me, then at Karen. "Ma'am, do you understand that making false emergency calls is a serious offense?" he said, using the same tone an adult would when explaining to a child why they shouldn't stick forks into electrical outlets. "We've wasted resources that could have been needed for an actual fire." Karen opened her mouth, then shut it, then opened it again, only for nothing but a strangled, gurgling noise to escape. She was clearly scrambling for an excuse, but even she realized she had messed up. But the smoke," she finally stammered, her voice shaky as if she didn't even believe herself. It's toxic." The firefighters just stared at her in silence. I couldn't hold back a smirk. "You know what's actually toxic, Karen?" I said, crossing my arms. "Your need to control everyone around you." She whipped around to face me, and the look on her face was priceless. Disgust, outrage, and fear. The captain allowed himself the faintest smirk before quickly regaining his professional demeanor. "Let's go, guys. Nothing to worry about here." He turned to Karen. "But ma'am, expect a fine for the false emergency call." At that moment, Karen's entire world seemed to shatter into a million pieces. "What?" she shrieked, her face contorting in horror. But he... The firefighters weren't even listening anymore. They walked back to their truck, one rolling his eyes, another muttering under his breath, and the third removing his gloves with an audible sigh of relief. I glanced from Karen to my plate, where a steaming, perfectly grilled rack of ribs sat waiting. Then an idea struck me. Grinning, I picked up my knife, sliced off a juicy piece, speared it with my fork, and took a slow, exaggerated bite. Then, holding up the rest of the ribs, I called out, "Thanks, guys. Want to take some to go?" The firefighters chuckled. One of them, a young guy with freckles, waved a hand. "Tempting, but we gotta go. Maybe next time." I smirked. As for Karen, she let out an angry huff, spun around, and stomped back to her house so hard it was as if she was trying to crush the earth beneath her feet. I watched her retreat and chuckled. But this wasn't over yet. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee and enjoyed the lingering aroma of last night's barbecue, something landed on my doorstep with a thud. An envelope. From the HOA. I knew exactly whose doing this was. Unfolding the letter, I skimmed through the usual bureaucratic jargon. Boiled down, it meant only one thing. You have violated HOA regulations by using a barbecue on your property. Cease immediately. I exhaled slowly and rolled my eyes. She just won't quit. Karen had been fined for a false emergency call. She had publicly embarrassed herself in front of the fire department, but she still managed to pull one last desperate move, wielding the HOA rulebook like a villain reaching for the big red button in a final doomed attempt to take me down with her. But I had an ace up my sleeve. Finishing my coffee, I sat down at my computer and started typing my response. Legally precise, flawlessly structured, with just a hint of sarcasm. As an environmental inspector, I clearly outlined that the HOA had no authority to ban environmentally safe activities, such as grilling in my own backyard. Then, I backed it up with federal and state laws proving my case. But the real kicker? I ended my letter with this. Given the HOA's strong concern for air quality, I will be initiating a formal review of potential environmental violations within the HOA itself. This will include an assessment of unauthorized tree removals, improper chemical waste disposal, and the use of non-compliant fertilizers. I could already picture Karen opening my letter. How she'd read the first part smugly, thinking she had won. Then she'd reach the final paragraph. How her face would drain of color. How her eyes would frantically scan the words, hoping she had misread them. How she'd realize exactly who she had picked a fight with. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, smirking. A week later, I received a response. Same HOA letterhead. Same formal tone. After reviewing our association's regulations, we have decided to lift all restrictions on barbecue usage. The HOA apologizes for any inconvenience. Translation? Karen can't stop me from grilling. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Sometimes justice isn't served with words, but with a good rack of ribs and a well-written report.